I had been a nun for 10 years. 3,652 days of prayer, service and turning away from the world. That morning, Father Matthew called me into his office. You have to leave. He did not look at me. You need to go now. Why? I asked. He closed his eyes. Because every time I see you, I am committing a sin. Because I want to kiss you. Because I love you. And it will damn me. But that came at the end of the conversation. At first, when I entered his office, he was standing at the window with his back to me. Morning light spilled through the glass, outlining him. He was thinner than he had been. More fragile. Sit down. Sister Elena, he said. Without turning. I sat in the chair before his desk. And instinctively I touched the silver cross at my throat. He had fastened it around my neck. 10 years earlier, on the day I took my vows. I still remembered his fingers brushing the back of my neck. As he closed the class. It lasted a second. No more, but I remembered it as if it had happened yesterday. The order has made its decision. Matthew still would not meet my eyes. They are sending you to Tanzania as a missionary. You leave tomorrow morning. The air in my lungs seemed to freeze. Tomorrow? Yes. But why so suddenly? I never received notice. No one told me. Matthew turned slowly. Deep shadows hollowed the skin beneath his eyes. As if he had not slept in weeks. His eyes, usually calm and peaceful, were red. Because I requested it. He said. His voice was exhausted, broken. You requested it, he nodded. I don't understand, I whispered. Did I do something wrong? Did I say something that offended you? If I made a mistake, please tell me I can change. He shook his head. You did nothing wrong. Then why? He shut his eyes and clenched his fists at his sides. 'Cause I can't keep seeing you. It felt as though the floor disappeared beneath me. What? I can't bear it anymore, Elena. He had never called me by my name without adding sister. Never. Matthew. Don't say my name. The words came sharply. Don't make this harder. I rose and took one step toward him. I don't understand any of this. 3 months ago, you smiled at me after Mass. And asked how the children at the orphanage were doing. But now you act as if I'm poison. He gave a bitter laugh. Because you are. His words struck like a slap. What? He opened his eyes. It was the first time he had looked directly at me since I entered. What I saw there frightened me. It was not indifference. It was not contempt. It was pain. You are poison, Elena. Not because you are bad, but because every time I see you, you remind me of everything I can never have. My mind went blank. No. I don't understand what you mean. Matthew raked a hand through his hair. His breathing was ragged, as though he had just finished a marathon. 10 years ago, you walked into this church. He said. I remember that day. It was raining. You were soaked through and shaking. A week earlier, your fiancé had died in a car crash. You came here looking for answers. For comfort. And I told you that God would heal your pain. I remembered. I remembered him sitting beside me in the pew. Listening without interrupting while I wept. Handing me a handkerchief and saying, the Lord has a plan for you. Trust him. You saved me. I said softly. Matthew let out a fractured laugh. No, Elena destroyed you. What are you talking about? He came one step closer, then another. And stopped a few feet away. I could see his hands shaking. The first time I saw you, I knew I was lost. I tried to convince myself it was pity. That I only wanted to help you as your priest. Every time you came to church. Every time you prayed, every time you smiled. I loved you a little more. The world stopped. What? When you decided to stay, when you said you wanted to become a nun. I thought it would save me. I thought that if you became Christ's bride, I could think of you as a sister in faith. But it didn't help. These 10 years. These 3,652 days have hell. My voice barely came out. Why did you never tell me? Tell you what? That I was a weak man. And that every night I knelt before the cross. And begged God to take these feelings from me. That every time I saw you with the children at the orphanage. And imagined what kind of mother you would be. I hated myself. My legs nearly gave way. Matthew, for 10 years. I tried to be strong. I tried to keep my distance. But 3 months ago, something changed. What changed? He bit his lip. A tear slid down his cheek. I saw you watering flowers in the garden. The wind lifted your veil. And for 1 second I saw your hair. And I wondered. What it would feel like to wake up every morning and see your face. What it would feel like to tell you I loved you. Without believing I had betrayed God. What it would feel like to grow old beside you. Tears began to run down my cheeks. I thought, terrified me. He went on, because I knew I could no longer lie to myself. I could not pretend this was a passing temptation. This was love. And love does not disappear through prayer, fasting or discipline. Matthew. So I asked that you be sent far away. Because if you stayed, one day I would commit an unforgivable sin. One day I would touch you, one day I would kiss you. I would drag your soul into hell with mine. I shook my head. Don't say that. It's true. No. I stepped toward him. It isn't. He stepped back as if my nearness could burn him. Elena, don't come closer. What if I told you my voice broke? What if I told you I, too? His eyes flew open. No. He was nearly shouting. Don't say it. Please don't say it. But it's true. No. He turned his back on. His spine rose and fell with each heavy breath. If you say it, Elena, we will destroy ourselves. If you say it, there will be no going back. I curled my hands into fists until my nails cut into my palms. Maybe I don't want to go back. Matthew went rigid. The silence in the office was suffocating. Only our uneven breathing remained. Slowly, he turned to face me. Do you know what you're saying? Yes. We made vows. We gave our lives to God. I know this is sin. I know. He walked toward me. Step after step. This time he did not retreat. He stopped only when there were inches between us. If we cross this line, he said quietly, there will be no forgiveness. Then cross it. I watched him lose control. His knees buckled. He fell before me, gripping the hem of my habit, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. I can't, he wept. I can't do this to you. You're pure. You're kind. I'm the demon here to tempt you. I knelt before him and cupped his face. It was the first time I had touched him in 10 years. You are not a demon, I whispered. You are a man and I am a woman. And this is the most human thing that has happened to us in 10 years. Elena, tell me what you want. Tell me the truth. He closed his eyes. Tears ran freely down his face. I want to kiss you. I want to wake beside you. I want to grow old next to you. I want everything I promised to give up when I became a priest. Then we can leave. We can leave the church. We can. No. He opened his eyes. And there was something in them I could not understand. We can't leave. Why not? Because he bit down on his lip. Because I made sure you couldn't. My heart stopped. What? He rose, helping me up as well. When he let go, his hands still trembled. 6 months ago, when I knew I couldn't go on like this, I made a decision. I thought it was right. I thought I was protecting you. What did you do? I petitioned for you to take solemn, perpetual vows. The air left my body. What? The order has already approved it. In 2 weeks, you will make your perpetual profession. After that, unless you receive a special dispensation from Rome, you cannot leave religious life. That process takes years. I backed away from him. Why? My voice was only a whisper. Why would you do that? Because I'm a coward. I knew that if you remained a nun with temporary vows, you could leave whenever you chose. You could meet someone, marry, have children, forget me. His voice shattered. I couldn't bear the thought. So I bound you to the church. And I bound you to me. Even if I couldn't have you. At least I knew no one else could. Tears burned my eyes. Do you love me? Yes. Then why are you locking me up? Because my love is selfish. Because my love is sick. I would rather you spend the rest of your life in this convent, knowing you would never belong to me or anyone else, than set you free and lose you forever. I took another step back. I hate you. I whispered. I know you had no right. I know you used God to lock me away. I know he covered his face. For 10 years. I prayed every night for God to forgive me. But I know he won't, because even now, even knowing how selfish I am, I don't regret it. I would rather you hate me and stay here than love you from far away, knowing you belong to someone else. I wanted to scream. To hit him, to run. But I could not move. He looked up. His eyes swollen and red with a despair I had never seen. That is why you have to go to Tanzania. If you stay, I will destroy you completely. I have already begun and I cannot stop. What about you? He smiled bitterly. I'll live with all of it. With this love burning me from within. With the guilt of locking you away. I will pray and serve. And when I die, I will accept the hell waiting for me. He stared at me. Only 6 feet separated us. Yet it felt like an abyss. Go, Elena. Please go. Leave. Before what? He did not answer. He only looked at me in his eyes. I saw something that frightened me, hunger. He took one step toward me. Go, he whispered. Even as his feet kept moving. I should have stepped back. I should have run. I did neither. He stood so close that I could feel the heat of his body. His hand rose slowly, trembling. And stopped inches from my cheek. If I touch you, he murmured. I won't be able to stop. Then don't stop. His hand touched my face. The contact was like an electric current. He shut his eyes. As if that light touch were pleasure and torture at once. Give me, he whispered. His other hand lifted to the back of my neck. And brushed the silver cross. Hanging there when I put this cross on you 10 years ago. He said, his voice breaking. My fingers touched your skin. It was 1 second. But that night I couldn't sleep because I wasn't thinking about God. I was thinking about how soft your skin was. And how badly I wanted to touch you again. Tears ran down my face. Wiped them away with his thumb. Elena, his voice was nearly a broken whisper. Tell me you hate me. Tell me this is wrong. Give me a reason to stop. I opened my mouth, shaking. Matthew. I, too. His breath caught. Our faces were inches apart. His hand held my cheek. His eyes searching mine as if he were waiting for me to stop him. But I didn't. He bent down. His lips almost grazing mine. I closed my eyes. Then in the most broken voice I had ever heard. As if he were speaking a prayer and a curse at once. He said, my name, Elena. His breath smelled of cold mint and dry paper. When his lips finally touched mine, it was neither the grand ruin he had prophesied nor the rapturous heaven I had spent 10 years mortifying out of my blood. It was something far more terrifying. It was human. His mouth was chapped. He trembled so violently that his teeth grazed mine with a small, sharp click, an accidental, clumsy sound that shattered the solemnity of the room. For 3 seconds, perhaps 4, the entire architecture of St. Jude's Parish, its 60-foot sandstone arches, its ledger books, its rows of unlit votive candles, its stained glass apostles staring down with leaden eyes, crumbled into the dust of an ordinary office smelling of floor wax and stale coffee. I did not close my hands around his shoulders, nor did I push him away. I stood, suspended in the amber of those 10 stolen years, feeling the rough wool of his cassock press against the starched linen of my gamp. His hand at my neck was burning, the silver crucifix caught between his thumb and my collarbone, pressing a hard, cold diamond of metal into my skin. Then he tore himself back. He hit the edge of the mahogany desk with a dull thud, knocking over a brass paperweight shaped like an olive branch. It rolled across the blotter and fell to the carpet with no sound at all. Matthew covered his mouth with both hands, his eyes wild, dilated until the pale green irises were swallowed whole by black. He looked at me as if I were a corpse that had sat up on the mortuary slab. God, he rasped into his fingers. God, God, forgive me. God, look away. He is looking, I said. My voice did not sound like my own, it sounded low. Flat, scraped clean of the liturgical sweetness I had cultivated for 3,652 days. He has been looking for 10 years. Matthew. You told me he sees into the marrow of the bone. He dropped his hands, his chest heaving under the black cloth. You must pack your trunk. The car from the diocese arrives at 5 tomorrow morning. Father. Renan will drive you to the airstrip in Leeds. From there, London. From London, Dar es Salaam. And the solemn vows? I asked, taking one step toward the desk. The grief that had paralyzed me minutes ago was curdling into an icy, clear-eyed rage. The petition you signed? The perpetual chains you forged for me without my consent? Matthew flinched, leaning back against the high wooden shelves of theological commentaries, Aquinas, Augustine, the Latin fathers whose leather spines he had kept dusted and aligned. I did what was necessary to preserve your soul. You did what was necessary to preserve your pride, I said. You wanted to ensure that if I could not be yours, I could never belong to the world. You made Christ my prison guard so you wouldn't have to watch me walk out of the gate. Elena. Do not call me that, I whispered, throwing his own words back into his face. 10 minutes ago you forbade me from speaking your name. Keep your cassock on. Father Matthew. Do not pretend to be a man only when it flatters your misery. The color drained from his face until he looked like the plaster Saint Sebastian. In the north transept, pierced not by arrows, but by the small, unbearable truths he had spent a decade dressing in the language of holy sacrifice. You think I don't know what I am, he whispered, his voice cracking like dry timber. You think I sleep? Every night for 10 years I have lain on that cot in The presbytery, listening to the rain on the slates, knowing that 300 yards away, across the courtyard, you were lying beneath a single wool blanket. I knew the hour you woke for matins. I knew the sound of your shoes on the flagstones. I knew the precise cadence of your breath when you knelt at the communion rail to take the host from my fingers. He stepped out from behind the desk, his hands open, palms upward, like an icon of supplication. I gave you to God because I was too weak to let you go, he said, tears finally spilling over his hollow cheeks. If you were out in the world, if you were walking down a street in Manchester, sitting in a cafe, laughing with someone who had the right to touch your hair, I would have gone mad. I would have torn off this collar and hunted you down like a beast. I needed the altar between us. I needed the vow to be stronger than my will. And what of my will? I asked. The tears were burning behind my own eyes now. Hot and shameful. 10 years ago, my fiancé was broken against an iron railing. On the M62. I came here bleeding to death in my spirit. I asked you for water. And you handed me a chalice of your own poison. You guided me into the novitiate. You told me the cloister was the only place where grief could be sanctified. It was, he cried out. It was sanctified. It was a cage. I screamed. The sound tore through the quiet office, vibrating against the leaded glass window that looked out over the dormant winter cabbage patch of the convent garden. It was a cage you built so you could be the only man who ever saw me pray. We stood in the gray morning light, breathing each other's air, ruined and exposed. There were no prayers left between us. There were no scriptures to quote. We were two middle-aged people standing in a drafty stone room in Yorkshire, surrounded by the debris of an impossible devotion. A sharp rap sounded at the heavy oak door. Father Matthew? The voice belonged to Sister Beatrice, the infirmarian. Crisp, 60 years old. Her footsteps always heralded by the faint rattle of wooden rosary beads. Matthew did not move. His eyes stayed locked on mine, wide and pleading, as if I held the power to grant him absolution or strike him dead where he stood. Father Matthew? Are you inside? The delivery from the altar bread guild has arrived. I took a deep, shuddering breath, stepped back until my heels touched the doorframe, and smoothed the front of my black scapular with hands that felt entirely numb. One moment, sister, I called out through the wood, my voice steady, perfectly pitched to the obedient register of a subordinate religious. Father Matthew was just giving me the itinerary for the provincial mission. I turned the brass latch and pulled the door open. The convent of Our Lady of the Seven Sorrows was built in 1874 by an eccentric wool baron who believed that high stone walls and northern winds were the only reliable remedies for original sin. Its corridors were long, paved with uneven gritstone flags that sweated moisture in November, and lit by low-wattage yellow bulbs that hummed like dying wasps. I walked the north cloister toward my cell, my habit making the familiar rhythmic hiss-shuck against my woolen stockings. For 10 years, that sound had been my metronome. It was the rhythm of safety. If you were moving, you were working. If you were still, you were praying. There was no third state. There was no space allotted in the rule of Saint Benedict for a woman to realize that the priest who had directed her conscience had effectively entombed her. When I entered my cell, the cold hit me like an open hand. The room was 6 paces by 8. A narrow iron bedstead with a horsehair mattress, covered by a gray blanket stamped with the blue letters DC, Daughters of the Cross. A pine washstand with a chipped enamel basin and pitcher. A small deal table, a wooden chair, and on the whitewashed wall, a black wooden crucifix. Without a corpus, a bare cross, meant to remind the nun that she herself was to hang upon it. On the table lay a small cardboard box containing my worldly belongings. Gathered 3 hours ago when the Mother Superior had first summoned me, my passport, issued 3 weeks prior without my knowledge, a yellow fever vaccination certificate, 3 pairs of reinforced black stockings, a copy of the Swahili English New Testament, and a letter from the Mother General in Rome, stamped with red wax. I sat on the wooden chair and picked up the letter. To our beloved daughter in Christ, Sister Elena of the Incarnation. Having weighed the spiritual needs of our mission in the Diocese of Sunhea, and upon the particular recommendation of your spiritual director, Father Matthew Vance, who has testified to your singular fortitude and readiness for the definitive sacrifice of perpetual vows. My thumb smeared the cheap ink of the signature. Fortitude. Readiness. Definitive sacrifice. How cleanly they wrote it down. How neatly the ecclesiastical bureaucracy converted a priest's suffocating, neurotic jealousy into an administrative decree from the Holy See. He had written to the bishop had written to the provincial had forwarded the dossier to the dicastery for Institutes of Consecrated Life in Rome. In the eyes of the Church, I was a Shining example of late vocation zeal, an austere widow in spirit ready to spend the remainder of her earthly days teaching catechism under a corrugated tin roof. 3 degrees south of the equator. None of them knew that Matthew had drafted the letters in the dead of night, his knuckles white against his fountain pen, trying to cast me across an ocean. Before he broke down and touched my mouth. A knock sounded at the open door of my cell. Mother Agath stood there. She was 78, her back curved like a dry hazel branch, her eyes clouded by cataracts that made her look as though she were permanently staring through morning mist. She had entered the convent during the reign of Pius XII, when nuns still wore linen wimples so stiff they cut into the jawline, and she possessed that terrifying, serene shrewdness peculiar to women who have spent half a century managing other people's silence. "You have not finished packing, Elena," she said. Her voice was dry, like dead leaves scraping across gravel. "There is very little to pack, Mother." She stepped into the room, her leather-soled shoes making no sound. She did not look at the bed or the desk, she looked directly at my face, her clouded eyes narrowing. "The air in the north corridor smells of sulfur today," she remarked, leaning her weight onto her polished blackthorn stick. "The boiler in the basement is old," I replied mechanically. "The boiler is cold iron. It has not been lit since Tuesday," she said. She paused, tapping her stick once against the flagstone. "A priest's soul is a dangerous place, my child. It is like an abandoned well. Men throw their sins down into it and walk away, but the water at the bottom does not stay clean. Eventually, the water rots. And if a woman leans over the lip to look inside, she falls." My fingers tightened around the edges of the letter. "Mother, did you know?" "Know what?" she asked smoothly. "That Matthew Vance looks at you during the Sanctus as if he is trying to remember what God looked like before the fall. I have been here since he was an altar boy with scabbed knees and an overactive conscience. His uncle was an archdeacon. His grandfather was a canon. The Vances do not break vows, Elena. They bend the world until it snaps, but they do not break their vows." "He had no right to write to Rome," I said, my voice rising, sharp and jagged. "He had no right to make me take perpetual vows. I have not made my final profession. I am bound only by my temporary vows until Michaelmas." Mother Agath looked at me with something that might have been pity, though in a woman of her age and order, it was difficult to distinguish from exhaustion. "The dispensation came from the sacred congregation 2 days ago," she said quietly. "Father Matthew brought the decree himself. He told the council you had expressed a desire to make your perpetual profession in private before your departure, to seal your obedience before entering the mission field. He lied." "Of course he lied," she said without hesitation. "Men in love always lie to the church. They call it holy prudence. But the seal is affixed, Elena. The bishop has countersigned it. On the books of the diocese, you are already perpetual. You belong to the order until death or the Pope dissolves you." The room seemed to shrink. The whitewashed walls moved closer, the bare wooden cross on the plaster seemed to stretch its arms until it blocked out the square of gray sky through the narrow window. "I will not go," I said. "If you refuse the mission, you are in open rebellion against the rule of obedience," Mother Agath said, her voice dropping into a register of cold administrative finality. "You will be stripped of your habit, dismissed from the congregation without a penny, and placed under canonical censure. Where will you go? Your parents are buried in Sheffield. Your fiancé's family has not spoken to you in 10 years. You have no money, no reference, no trade other than mending altar cloths and teaching 6-year-olds their Latin responses." She stepped closer to me, her gnarled, liver-spotted hand reaching out to touch the silver cross at my throat. Her fingers were dry and ice-cold. "Do you love him?" she asked suddenly. The question hung in the freezing air between us, obscene in its directness. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know who he is. I thought he was Christ's shadow. Now I see he is just a man who locked me in a cellar so he could look through the grate." "Then go to Africa," Mother Agath said, turning toward the door. "At least the heat there will burn the smell of him out of your clothes." The bell for Compline rang at 8 that night. It was a single, flat bronze note that tolled 50 times across the dark grounds, signaling the start of the great silence, the summum silentium, during which no sister was permitted to speak, even to save herself from an errant spark from the hearth, until the following morning after prime. I did not go to the chapel. I sat in the darkness of my cell, watching the beam of the sodium streetlight from the road outside cut through the bare lime trees and throw bars of amber light across the ceiling. At 10, the cloister grew entirely still. The sisters were asleep in their cells, their breathing rising and falling in the uniform rhythm of women who had surrendered their private histories to a communal timetable. I stood up, took off my leather shoes, and pulled a dark woolen shawl over my head, leaving my wimple and veil on the bed. For the first time in 10 years, my hair, long, graying at the temples, flattened against my scalp by a decade of linen bands, was exposed to the cold air of the room. It felt strange, like an uncovered wound. I slipped out into the corridor. The stones were freezing against the soles of my woolen stockings. Every joint in the ancient building groaned with the frost, the oak floorboards in the gallery, the lead flashing on the roof, the heavy iron hinges of the fire doors. I moved like a ghost through the corridors of my own youth, past the library, where I had studied the lives of the desert mothers, past the refectory where I had eaten 3,000 meals of boiled mutton and turnip without speaking a word, past the parlor where visitors were permitted to sit on the other side of an iron grill. I reached the passage that connected the convent to the sacristy of the main church. The door was locked with an old brass rim lock, but the key was always kept in the small niche behind the statue of Saint Joseph. I felt for the cold metal with my fingertips, found it, turned it slowly in the well-oiled mechanism, and stepped through into the church. The nave was vast, cavernous, and drowned in thick, suffocating darkness. The only illumination came from the sanctuary lamp, a single red glass bowl, suspended from a brass chain above the high altar, its wick floating in olive oil, casting a bloody, undulating glow across the marble steps and the gilded door of the tabernacle. And there, kneeling at the communion rail with his forehead pressed against the cold brass balustrade, was Matthew. He was not wearing his cassock. He wore an old gray wool jumper with fraying cuffs and trousers that were baggy at the knees, the clothes of a civilian, the clothes he had worn when he was 22, before they laid him out prostrate on the cathedral floor and poured the oil of ordination onto his palms. He was not praying. His shoulders were motionless, his head hung low, his arms dangling between his knees like those of a condemned man waiting for the hangman's step. I did not hide my approach. My feet whispered against the marble of the center aisle. He did not start or turn around. He simply spoke into the darkness, his voice dead and dry. I knew you would come. Where are the documents, Matthew? I asked, stopping 3 paces behind him. He lifted his head slowly. In the red light of the sanctuary lamp, his face was terrifying. The skin over his cheekbones was taut and yellowish, his lips were swollen where he had bitten them, his eyes were sunken deep into their sockets, hollowed out by a decade of internal warfare. They are in the parish register safe, he said, behind the vestment presses. Give me the key. He turned around slowly, sitting down on the bottom marble step of the altar. He rested his elbows on his knees, his hands hanging limp. It won't help you, Elena. The decree has been registered in the diocesan chancery in Leeds. Even if you burn the paper in this church, the copy in Rome stands. In the register of the Universal Church, Sister Elena of the Incarnation is perpetually professed. Then I will go to the police, I said. I will go to the press. I will tell them that Father Matthew Vance forged my signature on a petition for perpetual vows to prevent me from leaving his parish. A bitter, terrible smile touched the corners of his mouth. Do you think they would believe you? He whispered. A nun who had a nervous breakdown after her fiancé died? A nun who spent 10 years in complete seclusion, suddenly claiming her confessor forced her into a life of holiness? The bishop would have you moved to a psychiatric facility run by the Sisters of Mercy in Sussex before the morning edition hit the stands. They would say you were suffering from religious erotomania. They would say you were projecting your grief onto the priest who tried to save you. The sheer, monstrous accuracy of his words struck me like a physical blow. He was right. The institution was seamless. It had been perfecting its self-defense for 2,000 years. It had absorbed kings, heretics, empires, and plagues. It would swallow a solitary, penniless 40-year-old woman without leaving a ripple on the surface of its administrative peace. Why did you do it? I asked, dropping to my knees on the cold flagstones before him. Not in prayer, not in submission, but because my legs could no longer bear the weight of my own life. Look at me, Matthew. Look at what you have made of us. You are a priest who cannot pray, and I am a nun who hates God. Is this what you wanted? He reached out. This time, there was no hesitation, no holy terror. His fingers found my jawline, rough and warm, sliding up into the hair at my temple, his thumb tracing the curve of my cheekbone. I wanted you to stay, he whispered, his voice breaking into a dry sob. I wanted to see your face every morning at 8 o'clock. I wanted to give you the bread and watch you swallow it. I wanted to be the only man who heard the secrets of your soul in the dark of the box. When you told me last year that your grief for Julian had finally ended, that you felt peaceful, that you wondered if you might have a vocation in the world as a teacher, I felt the floor Drop out from under my life. He leaned forward until his forehead touched mine. His skin smelled of tobacco. And cold stone. You were going to leave me, he said. You were going to walk out through that gate in a blue dress, with your hair grown out, and you were going to forget the 10 years we spent together in this desert. You were going to find someone else. You were going to let another man hold your hand in the dark. I couldn't allow it. I would have rather seen you dead, Elena. I would have rather buried you in the convent cemetery under 6 feet of Yorkshire clay than watch you belong to another man. That isn't love, I said, my voice choking on the truth of it. That is murder. Matthew. You murdered my life to keep it in your museum. Then kill me, he whispered, pressing his lips against my temple, his tears wetting my hair. Kill me, Elena. Take the altar knife from the credence table. And cut my throat. I won't move. I swear to God I won't stop you. It would be easier than watching that car take you away tomorrow morning. I sat there, his head against mine, feeling the heavy, frantic beating of his heart against my chest. For one terrible, seductive second, the darkness in me answered the darkness in him. It would be so easy to stay. It would be so simple to give in to this diseased, beautiful, twisted devotion, to let him keep me in this stone cage, to meet him in the shadows of the sacristy between matins and lauds, to feed on the crumbs of his illicit adoration until we both grew old and died beneath the floorboards of this northern mausoleum. It would be easier than walking out into a world where I had no money, no home, no fiancé, and no God. I closed my eyes. In the dark behind my eyelids, I saw Julian's face. Not the mangled, bloody face I had seen in the mortuary in 1994, but the face he had when we were 22. Standing on the pier at Scarborough, the wind whipping his hair across his eyes. Laughing as the rain ruined our fish and chips. Don't let them make you small, Ellie, he had said to me that afternoon. You got a mind like an open field. Don't let anyone put a fence around it. 10 years of incense and Latin had buried that voice under 3,000 feet of liturgical dust. But it was still there. I opened my eyes. The red light of the sanctuary lamp was not holy. It was just a wick burning in oil, casting shadows on cold stone. I raised my hands, placed them against Matthew's chest, and pushed him away. He fell back against the altar steps, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. No, I said. What are you doing? He asked, scrambling to his feet as I turned toward the south transept. I am leaving, I said. You have no shoes. You have no coat. Elena, the car doesn't come until 5. I am not taking the bishop's car, I said, walking toward the heavy iron-bound door of the sacristy. And I am not going to Tanzania. You have no money, he cried out, his voice echoing through the vaulted rafters of the empty church. You will freeze on the moors. Elena, listen to me. He ran after me, his hands reaching for my shoulders, but I spun around and faced him beneath the great wooden crucifix of the rood screen. If you touch me again, Father Matthew, I said, my voice dropping into a register so cold and sharp that he froze in his tracks, I will start screaming. I will scream until every sister in the convent wakes up. I will scream until the neighbors call the constabulary. And when they break down these doors, I will tell them everything. I will tell them about the petition. I will tell them about the letter to the bishop. I will tell them about the kiss in your office. His face went gray. You would destroy the parish. You destroyed it 10 years ago, I said. You just forgot to tell the parishioners. I turned the heavy key in the sacristy door, pulled it open, and walked into the vestry. The vestry smelled of cedar, lavender, and damp linen. Along the wall stood the great oak presses, 4 feet deep, containing the liturgical vestments of the parish, green for ordinary time, purple for Lent, red for the martyrs, white for the feasts of the Virgin and the Resurrection. I walked to the safe in the corner. The key was hanging on its brass hook behind the portrait of Pope John Paul II. Matthew had never changed the combination. He had used the date of his ordination, August 15, 84. I spun the brass dial, 15/8/84. The heavy iron bolt clicked back with a sound like a pistol cocking. I swung the door open. Inside lay the parish registers, thick, leather-bound folio volumes containing the records of every baptism, marriage, and burial performed in St. Jude's since 1880. And on top of the books lay a manila folder marked with my name. Sister Elena, Margaret Mary Vaughan, dossier of profession. I pulled it out. Inside were 6 documents, the original medical clearance, the psychological evaluation from the diocesan clinic in Sheffield, the letters of recommendation from the Mother General, and the final, fatal document, the Decretum Professionis Perpetui, printed on vellum, bearing the embossed seal of the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life, with the forged signature of Sister Elena of the Incarnation executed in a hand so perfectly mimicking my own that I felt a cold nausea rise in the back of my throat. Matthew stood in the doorway of the vestry, his hand leaning against the jamb. His breath coming in ragged gasps. Elena, please. I took the silver candle lighter from the table, turned the brass valve on the small gas cylinder at its base, and clicked the striker. A small, blue-tipped yellow flame leaped from the brass nozzle. Elena, no, he lunged forward. That is an official document of the Holy See. If you burn it. If I burn it, I am still a nun on paper in Rome, I said, holding the corner of the vellum over the flame. I know that. I am not stupid, Matthew. This paper is not my freedom. This paper is just the receipt for your crime. The dry vellum caught with a sharp, hissing crackle. The blue wax of the Roman seal melted into bubbling, smoking drops that fell onto the zinc floor of the safe. The yellow flames curled the edges of the Latin text, blackening the names of the cardinals, the bishops, and the holy congregation, turning 10 years of legal entrapment into a gray, glowing curl of ash. I dropped the burning folder into the empty brass brazier used for the Easter fire. The smoke rose into the vestry, smelling of burnt oil and old parchment. Matthew sank onto a bench, his head in his hands, weeping silently. I reached up to my neck. My fingers found the silver clasp of the crucifix he had fastened around my throat on the day I took my first vows in 1997. The clasp was stiff with age and body oil, but I pressed the tiny lever until it gave way with a small ping. I held the cross in my palm for a moment. It was warm from my skin. It was light, scarcely 2 ounces of hollow silver on an ordinary steel chain. I walked over to where Matthew sat, took his right hand, pried his fingers open, and pressed the cross into his palm. Keep it, I said. You bought it with 10 years of my life. It belongs to you. I returned to my cell at 3 in the morning. I did not put on the habit. I went to the bottom of the cardboard box where they had stored the clothes I had worn when I entered the convent 10 years ago, clothes that had been washed, folded, and forgotten in an attic trunk. A charcoal wool skirt that hung loose around my hips, for I had lost 2 stone since 1994. A cream-colored cable-knit jumper, smelling of cedar chips and lavender. A pair of brown leather lace-up brogues, their soles stiff and dry from disuse. And a dark green wool overcoat with plastic tortoiseshell buttons, one of which was chipped. I dressed in the dark. When I put on the shoes, my feet felt strangely heavy, ungrounded. For 10 years, I had worn only soft-soled convent slippers that made no sound on stone. Now, every step I took across the wooden floorboards of my cell was loud, decisive, and irreversible. Clack, clack, clack. I stood before the small square of silvered glass above the washstand. In the yellow light of the sodium bulb from the road, I looked at my own face. I was 41 years old. There were deep lines between my eyebrows, carved by thousands of hours of squinting at small print breviaries in cold chapels. My skin was pale, almost translucent, untouched by the sun since the summer Julian died. My hair, chopped unevenly below my ears, was streaked with silver at the temples. I was not the girl who had walked into St. Jude's in the rain with a shattered heart. I was not the Holy Virgin Father Matthew had constructed in his library of forbidden desires. I was a woman standing in a cold room, with 27 pounds in old 5-pound notes in the pocket of an out-of-date coat, with no husband, no vocation, no home, and no destination. I picked up my small canvas bag, the bag I had brought with me 10 years ago, containing only my identity card, my birth certificate, and a small, water-damaged photograph of Julian sitting on a stone wall in the Peak District. I did not leave a note. I walked down the north stairs, past the kitchen where the great copper kettles hung in silence, past the laundry where the wet habits of 30 women were drying on wooden racks like black banners, and reached the heavy oak back door that led to the kitchen garden. The bolt was rusty. I threw my weight against it, it slid back with a loud, iron shriek that seemed to rattle the entire foundation of the house. I stepped out into the night. The cold hit me like a bucket of well water. The air was clear, sharp with frost, smelling of dead leaves, chimney smoke, and the damp earth of Yorkshire. In November. I looked up. Above the black silhouette of the convent roof, the sky was not the ceiling of a church. It was not a gilded vault populated by weeping saints and an angry, jealous God. It was vast, indifferent, and freezing, glittering with millions of cold, uncaring stars that had burned for 5 billion years before the first priest ever put on a linen alb, and would burn for 5 billion more after the last cathedral had crumbled into sand. I walked through the cabbage patch, unlatched the green wooden gate in the garden wall, and stepped out onto the public lane. The tarmac was black and wet with frost. I turned south, toward the railway station in Keighley, 3 miles down the valley. Behind me, the great stone mass of Our Lady of the Seven Sorrows sat among the bare trees like a ship stranded on a sandbar. A single yellow light was burning. On the ground floor, the light in Matthew's office. I did not look back again. The waiting room at the Keighley railway station smelled of paraffin, damp raincoats, and diesel exhaust. It was 5:30 in the morning. 2 coal miners with soot-stained faces sat on the wooden bench across from me, their metal thermoses between their knees, talking in low, guttural Yorkshire accents about the morning shift at the pit in Castleford. A teenage girl in a denim jacket with a neon pink rucksack was asleep against the vending machine, her breath misting in the freezing air of the room. No one looked at me. To them, I was just a middle-aged woman in an old-fashioned green coat, waiting for the 6:12 train to Leeds. I was not a bride of Christ. I was not a consecrated virgin. I was not a vessel of holy scandal. I was merely a passenger with a one-way ticket. At 6 o'clock, the station doors swung open. Matthew stood on the threshold. He had not put on a coat. He was wearing his black cassock, the hem of it soaked with mud and wet grass, his white clerical collar crooked against his throat. His hair wild and matted with frost. He looked like an apparition that had escaped from a burning cathedral. The 2 miners stopped talking and stared at him with that slow, suspicious curiosity working-class men reserve for madmen and the clergy. Matthew saw me sitting on the wooden bench. He did not run. He walked toward me with a slow, mechanical gait, his breath coming in white plumes that tore apart in the draft from the open doors. He stopped 3 feet from my bench. His hands were stuffed into his cassock pockets, his shoulders hunched against the cold. "You walked," he said. His voice was a rasp, stripped of all resonance. "It's only 3 miles, I replied. "Father Brennan went to your cell at 5, he said, staring at the floor. Between my shoes. He found the box. He found the habit on the bed. He went to Mother Agath. What did she say? She told him that the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, and that he should go back to bed and stop making a fuss in the dark." A ghost of a laugh, cracked and terrible, escaped Matthew's throat. "She knew. She has known for years. She told me you wouldn't break your vows," I said. "She said the Vances bend the world until it snaps, but they never break their vows." Matthew looked up. His eyes were red, the skin around them swollen and dark. "I called the bishop," he said. The noise in the waiting room seemed to drop away. The diesel hum of the approaching train vibrated through the floorboards under our feet. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him that I forged the petition for your perpetual vows," he said simply. "I told him that I had abused my office as your director to keep you in the diocese against your will. I told him that if he did not issue an immediate, unconditional decree of secularization and release you from all religious obligations, I would call the Yorkshire Post at 8 o'clock and give them the full transcript of my confession." I stared at him. "Matthew. The decree is being drafted this morning," he continued, his voice flat, drained of all emotion, like a man reading an inventory of goods after a fire. "You are free, Elena. You are not Sister Elena anymore. You are Margaret Mary Vaughan. You have no vows. You have no canonical penalties. You can go wherever you like. You can marry. You can live. And you?" I asked. He looked down at his cassock, the long row of 33 black buttons, representing the years of Christ's life on earth, the wool now stained with the mud of the ditch he had stumbled through on his way to the station. "I will be suspended at Davini's by noon," he said. "The bishop's secretary is arriving at the presbytery at 10 with the canonical citation. I will be stripped of my faculties. I will not be allowed to say mass, hear confessions, or wear the habit. I have 48 hours to vacate the parish." "Where will you go?" "My brother has a small farm in Northumberland," he said, staring out through the grimy glass of the waiting room toward the railway tracks. "He needs someone to mend fences and drive the tractor. He doesn't ask questions about God." The 6:12 train from Skipton rounded the curve, its yellow headlamps cutting through the morning fog, the scream of its brakes drowning out the murmur of the station. The 2 miners picked up their thermoses and walked toward the platform. The girl with the pink rucksack woke with a start, hoisted her bag, and shuffled out into the cold. I stood up, picked up my small canvas bag, and faced him. We stood together on the platform as the train hissed to a halt, the doors sliding open with a pneumatic clatter. The smell of hot metal, diesel, and wet gravel filled the air. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "You could have let me run. You could have told the bishop I vanished in the night. You didn't have to destroy yourself." Matthew looked at me. For the first time in the 10 years I had known him, his eyes were clear. The fever, the possessiveness, the suffocating, holy terror That had twisted his soul into a knot of pious cruelty. All of it had been burned away by the simple, catastrophic act of telling the truth. Because it was the only way to make sure you were truly free, he said. If you were hiding from the church, you would always be looking over your shoulder. You would always be thinking of me. You would always be a runaway nun. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his hand, and held it out to me. In his palm lay the silver cross I had left in his hand in the vestry. But he had broken the chain. The small silver corpus was gone, only the bare, simple cross remained. Take it, he said. No, Matthew. I told you. Take it, he repeated softly, pressing it into my fingers and closing my hand over it. Not as a vow. Not as a memory of St. Jude's. Just as a piece of silver. Sell it in Leeds. You'll need the money for a room tonight. I looked down at my closed fist. The metal was cold now, but it had no weight. It was just an object. A thing made by a silversmith in Birmingham, sold in a shop, bought with £5, and now destined to be melted down or pawned for 3 days' rent in a city I hadn't seen in a decade. Matthew, I said. He stepped back. He did not try to touch my face. He did not try to kiss my cheek. He pulled the collar of his ruined cassock together against the northern wind that came howling down the platform between the carriages. Get on the train, Margaret, he said. It was the first time he had ever spoken my true name. It sounded strange. It sounded large, wide, like an open field without a fence. I stepped up into the carriage. The door slid shut behind me with a heavy, final thud. I found a seat by the window, wiped the condensation from the glass with the sleeve of my green coat, and looked out. Matthew was still standing on the platform. The wind was whipping the black wool of his cassock around his shins, his gray jumper showing at the neck where his collar had come undone. He looked small, thin, and entirely ordinary, a man standing in the gray dawn of an English railway station, watching a train pull away. The whistle blew. The carriage lurched forward, the wheels grinding against the cold steel of the rails, slowly gathering speed as we moved out of the station, past the coal yards, past the rows of red brick Victorian terraces with their smoking chimneys, past the grey stone walls of the valley, and out onto the open moors. I sat back against the rough blue upholstery of the seat. The train rushed through the morning mist, and ahead of us, beyond the black spine of the Pennines, the sun was rising, not with the gold and crimson of a church window, but with the pale, clear, blinding light of an ordinary day.